The software of quantum stabilizers broke the silence as the Zornak scout ship Celestial Probe materialized at the edge of the Sol system. Captain Lyra Zinn adjusted her neural interface, scanning the holographic displays that shimmered with data points about the small blue planet below. Earth, a world that had been nothing more than a footnote in galactic archives until now. Preliminary scans complete, announced First Officer Vren, his scaled fingers dancing across the molecular light interface. Atmosphere compatible. Primitive technological development. Multiple biological ecosystems. His voice carried the typical Zornak blend of scientific detachment and mild condescension. Captain Zinn leaned forward, her iridescent eyes narrowing. Their mission was simple: preliminary first contact assessment. Determine the planet's technological capabilities, potential threat level, and suitability for diplomatic engagement. Countless species had been evaluated this way, most found wanting, few ever progressing to actual communication. Below them, unaware of the alien observation, Dr. Emma Rodriguez adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and squinted against the desert sun. The research station's perimeter stretched around her, a collection of metal prefabs and scientific equipment nestled in the harsh landscape of the Sonoran Desert. Her current project tracked coyote behavior, a long-term study that had consumed the better part of 3 years. A pack of 6 coyotes moved through the rocky terrain, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Most researchers would maintain a careful distance. Emma moved among them, as if she were part of the pack, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there, troublemakers," she murmured, crouching down as one of the younger coyotes approached. Her hand extended, fingers spread in a gesture of peace. The animal's ears, which had been slightly pinned back, now perked up with curiosity. Inside the Celestial Probe, the ship's xenobiological sensors went wild. "Captain," Vren's voice carried an unusual note of confusion. "Our sensors are detecting an unprecedented neural interaction. The human female is engaging with a pack of apex predators in a manner that defies all known interspecies communication protocols." Lyra Zinn's interest peaked. The holographic displays zoomed in, showing Emma's interactions in microscopic detail. Neural pathways, emotional frequencies, body language. Every aspect of the interaction was being analyzed in real time. The coyotes, which should have been wary of human presence, moved around Emma with a bizarre sense of companionship. One of the younger animals actually nudged her hand, seeking contact. Another lay down nearby, displaying a level of trust that contradicted every known predator-human interaction model. "Impossible," Vren muttered, running additional scans. "The chemical and neural markers suggest." "No, that can't be correct." "What?" Zinn demanded. "The coyotes are displaying pack-bonding behavior with the human, not submission, not threat assessment, actual social integration." On the ground, Emma laughed, a sound that carried surprising complexity. She pulled a small tracking device from her pocket, carefully attaching it to the lead coyote's collar. The animal remained perfectly still, cooperative in a way that seemed to defy natural behavior. The Zornak ship's computer began compiling data, color-coded warning signs flashing across the displays. Unprecedented, anomalous, potentially significant. "Prepare initial contact protocols," Captain Zinn ordered. "But do not approach. I want to understand what we're seeing first." Her mind raced with possibilities. Humanity had been a mystery, a species that didn't quite fit into any known galactic classification. Technologically inconsistent, biologically adaptive, behaviorally unpredictable. And now, this. A human researcher moving with impossible ease among predators that should have viewed her as a threat. The coyotes began to move away, and Emma Rodriguez stood, brushing desert dust from her pants. She looked up, not directly at the hidden alien ship, but in a way that almost seemed like she sensed something was watching. For just a moment, the sensors on the Celestial Probe detected something that would later puzzle Zornak researchers for years. A momentary spike of energy that resembled communication, but didn't match any known form of transmission. First Contact had just become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The United Nations Sinological Engagement Center stood as a testament to humanity's preparation for First Contact. A sprawling complex of gleaming architecture and advanced security systems, it was designed to be both welcoming and formidable. Dr. Emma Rodriguez stood among the diplomatic delegation, her desert research attire replaced by a crisp navy blue suit that did little to hide her inherent sense of calm. Captain Lyra Zinn and her senior officers entered the main conference chamber, their bioadaptive environmental suits shifting colors to match the room's neutral tones. The Zornak delegation moved with a precise, almost mechanical grace, each step calculated, each gesture purposeful. The initial diplomatic protocols were painfully formal. Translation devices hummed, converting complex linguistic patterns between human English and the melodic, harmonic language of the Zornak. Captain Zinn's lead translator, a sophisticated AI named Ark, worked overtime to capture the nuanced communication. "We have observed your species for several solar cycles," Zinn began, her translator rendering her words with clinical precision. "Your technological development is inconsistent, advanced in some areas, primitive in others." Emma caught the slight undertone of condescension. She dealt with academic dismissiveness before. This was merely on an interstellar scale. The chamber's security was unlike anything humans had previously designed. Multiple layers of defense systems surrounded the diplomatic area. Quantum-locked force fields, neural disruption grids, and most notably, a massive biomechanical security creature stationed at the far end of the room. The creature was a marvel of technological engineering. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, it appeared to be a living fusion of organic matter and advanced machinery. Metallic plates shifted like living skin over pulsing biological components. Multiple sensory appendages extended and retracted with machine-like precision. It was designed as the ultimate security measure, capable of neutralizing threats across multiple dimensional spectrums. No one was supposed to approach it, ever. Midway through the diplomatic discussions, an alarm pierced the carefully maintained calm. The biomechanical security creature's neural circuits began to destabilize. Warning lights flashed across its surface, and the multiple appendages started to extend in increasingly erratic patterns. The Zornak security team froze. Their training was extensive, but this was beyond standard protocol. Captain Zinn's hand moved instinctively to a defensive device on her environmental suit. Emma Rodriguez did something entirely unexpected. She stood up. "Everyone stay calm," she said, her voice carrying a frequency that seemed to cut through the rising tension. The Zornak delegation stared in shock as she took a step toward the malfunctioning biomechanical creature. Their universal translators struggled to process her emotional output. It didn't match any known threat or submission response. The creature's appendages, which had been extending with increasing violence, began to slow. Its multiple sensory inputs, designed to detect and neutralize threats, seemed confused by Emma's approach. She spoke softly, her words a mixture of scientific observation and something that defied technological understanding. "Hey there. Everything's going to be okay." Her hand extended, not in a defensive posture, but in an almost gentle invitation. The biomechanical creature's most advanced sensors detected something impossible. Neural pathways that shouldn't exist began to calm. The erratic movement slowed, then stopped entirely. And then, in a moment that would be replayed millions of times across multiple star systems, the creature made a sound. Not a mechanical noise, not a threat response, but something remarkably close to a contented hum. Captain Zinn's translator went silent, unable to process the impossible interaction happening before its algorithms. Emma's hand touched the creature's primary sensory cluster, where every known protocol suggested instant destruction. There was only stillness, connection, understanding. The Zornak delegation watched in complete, stunned silence. First Contact had just been redefined. The Zornak Central Research Facility hummed with an energy of pure scientific obsession. Holographic displays covered every available surface, each one analyzing the footage of Emma Rodriguez's impossible interaction with the biomechanical security creature from multiple perspectives. Dr. Cax, the lead xenobiologist, had not slept in what humans would consider days. His 8-fingered hands moved across quantum analysis interfaces, peeling back layer after layer of data. Behind him, a team of the most brilliant Zornak researchers worked in a state of collective disbelief. "This defies every known interspecies communication model," Dr. Cax muttered, his translator rendering his words with a mix of frustration and wonder. The primary display showed Emma's neural patterns during her interaction with the security creature, a complex tapestry of emotional and neurological signals that seemed to break fundamental laws of biological interaction. Dr. Emma Rodriguez sat in a carefully designed observation chamber, seemingly unperturbed by the intense scrutiny. She was surrounded by an array of creatures that would have terrified most species, a collection gathered from various research facilities and carefully contained environments. A Martian sandcrawler, a creature with razor-sharp exoskeletal plates and a nervous system that typically triggered immediate defensive responses, sat docilely next to her. A bioengineered predator from the methane oceans of Proxima Centauri allowed her to examine its sensory clusters without so much as a defensive twitch. The research team had been collecting data from human interactions across multiple planetary systems. The results were consistently baffling. A human marine biologist who could approach a pack of quantum-shifting sea predators on Europa. A zoological researcher who successfully tagged and tracked a species of telepathic forest guardians on Kepler-62f. Wildlife conservationists who could approach radiation-resistant predators on mining colonies. But Emma Rodriguez represented something more. Her interactions weren't just about physical proximity or temporary calm. There was a deeper connection that the Zornak scientific community couldn't comprehend. "Neural frequency modulation is impossible," insisted Dr. Vren, the team's quantum neurologist. "Humans shouldn't be able to broadcast emotional states with this level of precision. It's like they're speaking an entirely unknown language of empathy." Dr. Cax zoomed in on a specific set of neural readings. The human brain showed activity in regions that the Zornak considered vestigial or non-functional. Mirror neurons that seemed to extend beyond traditional biological limitations. Emotional processing centers that didn't just interpret signals but appeared to generate them in a way that could influence other biological systems. Emma looked up at the observation window, as if she knew exactly how intensely she was being studied. She scratched the head of the Martian sandcrawler, which made a sound remarkably similar to a purr. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Dr. Cax discovered a unique neural pathway in human brains that seemed to generate what could only be described as an emotional frequency. It wasn't communication in the traditional sense. It wasn't a language. It was something more fundamental, a way of projecting emotional states that could literally recalibrate the neural pathways of other living beings. "It's not control," Dr. Cax explained to the research team. "It's understanding. These humans don't dominate. They communicate on a level we've never seen before." The implications were staggering. Where other species saw threats, humans saw potential connections. Where technological solutions failed, human empathy seemed to succeed. In the observation chamber, Emma Rodriguez simply continued her work. To her, this was nothing extraordinary. She was doing what she had always done, approaching the world with curiosity, respect, and a fundamental belief in connection. Outside the chamber, the Zornak researchers were rewriting everything they knew about interspecies communication. The universe, they were learning, was far more complex than their most advanced technologies could ever understand. And humans, it seemed, were holding the key to a language of understanding that transcended traditional scientific comprehension. The Horizon Research Station hung in the void of deep space, like a wounded beast, its multiple containment rings flickering with failing emergency systems. Located in the treacherous Sigma Quadrant, the station was humanity's most ambitious xenobiological research facility, a massive complex housing some of the most dangerous and incomprehensible life forms ever discovered. Dr. Emma Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the rescue vessel Pathfinder, her eyes fixed on the station's deteriorating structural readouts. Beside her, Captain Marcus Chen reviewed the catastrophic scenario. Multiple containment zones had failed, releasing creatures that most species would consider impossible to control. 37 distinct life forms are currently uncontained, the ship's artificial intelligence reported. Projected xenobiological contamination in 6 hours. Recommended protocol: complete station destruction. Emma's hand moved across the holographic display, her fingers tracing the station's complex layout. Not an option, she said firmly. The Zornak observation team watched remotely, their sensors capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Captain Lyra Zinn's voice crackled through the communication channel. Dr. Rodriguez, your team cannot possibly manage this. The risk is... We're going in, Emma interrupted, her voice calm but absolute. The Pathfinder approached the research station with precision. A team of 5 human researchers prepared for deployment, each selected not for their combat skills or technological expertise, but for their demonstrated ability to connect with unpredictable life forms. As they entered the station, the chaos became immediately apparent. Containment zones sparked and flickered. Creatures that defied traditional biological classification moved through the corridors, some floating, some crawling, some existing in states between matter and energy. Most species would have activated weapons or initiated complete destruction protocols. The human team moved differently. Dr. Rodriguez approached a creature that seemed to be a living cloud of electrical energy, a being that had destroyed 3 previous research teams. Her colleague, Dr. Aisha Khan, watched a creature of crystalline composition that could convert matter into pure energy. "Hey there," Emma spoke softly to the electrical cloud, her hand extended, not in a defensive posture, but in an invitation. The energy being paused. Its typical response to approaching life forms was immediate destruction. But something about Emma's approach was different. Dr. Khan worked with the crystalline creature, her movements slow and deliberate. Where technological solutions had failed, she projected a sense of calm that seemed to transcend physical communication. The Zornak observers watched in disbelief. Their most advanced sensors struggled to comprehend what was happening. The human team wasn't fighting the creatures. They weren't containing them. They were communicating. One by one, the most dangerous life forms began to calm. The electrical cloud wrapped around Emma's extended hand like a curious child. The crystal creature aligned its energy patterns with Aisha's emotional projection. "Impossible," Captain Zinn muttered, watching the live feed. The station's artificial intelligence began to recalibrate. Containment systems that had been on the brink of total failure started to stabilize. The humans moved through the station like orchestra conductors, each gesture and emotional projection guiding the dangerous creatures back to their designated areas. What should have been a mission of destruction became a rescue operation. As the last creature found its way back to a stabilized containment zone, Dr. Rodriguez looked up at the observation cameras. Her expression wasn't one of triumph, but of simple understanding. The Zornak research team sat in stunned silence. Captain Lyra Zinn's translator struggled to process the data. Conventional scientific understanding suggested this was impossible, and yet the evidence was right in front of them. Humanity had just demonstrated a capability that went beyond technological advancement. They had shown an ability to communicate, to understand, to connect with life forms that existed beyond traditional comprehension. The universe, it seemed, was about to be redefined. The grand conclave of galactic species convened in a massive spherical chamber that floated in the neutral space between 3 major star systems. Hundreds of delegations from across known space gathered, each with their own translation systems, environmental requirements, and centuries of diplomatic protocols. At the center of it all sat Dr. Emma Rodriguez and her team, looking almost incongruously simple among the elaborate alien delegations. The Zornak Confederation, still reeling from the research station rescue, had proposed a revolutionary motion. Humans would be offered a unique diplomatic role, not as a traditional military or economic power, but as mediators and interspecies communication specialists. Captain Lyra Zinn stood to present the proposal, her translator rendering her words with unprecedented urgency. For millennia, we have approached unknown life forms with fear, with technological barriers, with defensive protocols, she began. Humans have demonstrated something entirely different. They do not see threats. They see potential connections. The chamber buzzed with translation systems and neural interfaces. Representatives from the crystalline societies of Andromeda, the energy-based collectives of the Triangulum galaxy, and the silicon-based life forms of the Outer Rim all listened intently. Dr. Rodriguez sat quietly, her presence itself a statement. She wore no special diplomatic attire, no technological enhancements, just a simple research uniform that spoke of practicality rather than ceremony. Dr. Cax, now a chief scientific advisor, presented holographic evidence. Recordings from multiple planetary systems showed human researchers establishing contact with life forms that had resisted communication for centuries. A telepathic forest guardian on Kepler-62 that had destroyed 3 previous research missions now allowed human botanists to study its intricate communication networks. Quantum-shifting ocean predators on Europa now worked alongside marine researchers. The diplomatic implications were staggering. Humans do not conquer, Dr. Cax explained. They connect. Where our most advanced translation technologies fail, human empathy succeeds. A representative from the Crystalline Confederation of Andromeda raised a complex appendage. Explain this connection, the being requested. Its form was more geometric pattern than biological entity, communication typically occurring through precise mathematical exchanges. Emma stepped forward. No translator, no technological interface, just her voice. She began to tell a story. Not a scientific report, not a diplomatic statement, but a narrative about understanding. About seeing beyond the immediate, about recognizing the potential in every living system. The translation systems went silent. Something else was happening. Representatives from different species began to feel something beyond words. Emotional frequencies that transcended linguistic barriers. A fundamental understanding that cut through technological limitations. The Zornak delegation presented their proposal. Humans would be offered a new kind of diplomatic role. Not as warriors, not as economic partners, but as mediators. Teams would be sent to planetary systems with intractable conflicts, to research stations with communication challenges, to explore regions where traditional diplomatic approaches had failed. We are not offering this out of weakness, Captain Zinn explained. We are offering this because humans represent a fundamental shift in how we understand communication, connection, and potential. The vote was unprecedented. Instead of the typical lengthy deliberations, a consensus emerged with remarkable speed. Humans would be given unprecedented access to research facilities, diplomatic channels, and exploration opportunities. Dr. Rodriguez looked slightly bemused by the entire proceedings. To her, this was not a grand diplomatic victory. It was simply an extension of what she had always done, approach the unknown with curiosity, respect, and an open mind. As the conclave concluded, something fundamental had changed. The galaxy was beginning to understand that technological advancement was not about superior weaponry or more complex systems. It was about the ability to connect, to understand, to see potential where others saw only barriers. Humanity had just been invited to reshape galactic understanding, not through force, but through empathy. Core Prime loomed like a nightmare made physical. From orbit, the planet appeared as a swirling mass of toxic atmosphere, jagged mountain ranges, and landscapes that seemed to pulse with hostile intent. No exploration team had ever survived more than 72 hours on its surface. The Galactic Exploration Committee had issued what amounted to an impossible challenge. If humans could demonstrate their unique abilities here, it would cement their reputation as more than just a curiosity among spacefaring species. Dr. Emma Rodriguez led a small team of 5 researchers. Each had been carefully selected not for their combat skills or technological expertise, but for their demonstrated ability to connect with seemingly impossible life forms. "This is different," Dr. Aisha Khan whispered as their landing module pierced the planet's turbulent atmosphere. Sensors went haywire, showing impossible biological signatures that defied standard classification. The landing zone was a plateau surrounded by razor-sharp crystalline formations that seemed to breathe and shift. Atmospheric readings were toxic by any standard measurement. Radiation levels would have killed most known species within minutes. Their protective suits were more than just environmental shields. They were complex bioadaptive systems that could theoretically withstand the planet's extreme conditions. But theoretical protection meant little on Core Prime. As the team's first foot touched the surface, the planet seemed to react. The crystalline formations began to pulse with an inner light. Creatures that existed between solid and energy states began to emerge from the rocky terrain. Multi-limbed predators with sensory clusters that could detect threat from light years away started to converge on the human team. Where any other species would have activated defensive protocols, Emma Rodriguez did something entirely unexpected. She sat down. Her team looked at her in shock. The incoming creatures, each one a living weapon that had destroyed previous exploration attempts, continued their approach. Emma began to sing. Not a song in any traditional sense. It was more a complex series of emotional projections. Her voice carried frequencies that seemed to transcend sound, touching something more fundamental. Her hand extended, not in a defensive posture, but in an invitation. The first creature reached the team. It was a being that defied traditional biological classification. Imagine a living crystal that could shift between solid, liquid, and energy states. Multiple sensory clusters extended, each one capable of detecting and neutralizing threats across multiple dimensional spectrums. It stopped inches from Emma. The Zornak observation team, monitoring from their ship in orbit, went completely silent. Their most advanced sensors struggled to process what was happening. Hours passed. The creatures that should have been destroying the human team began to move differently. They didn't retreat. They didn't attack. They began to interact. One by one, the most dangerous predators of Core Prime allowed the human researchers to collect samples to study their complex biological systems. Creatures that had destroyed entire robotic exploration teams now moved with a kind of cooperative curiosity. Dr. Khan documented everything. Biological samples that had been impossible to collect now came willingly. Complex ecological interactions that had been theoretical became observable reality. "It's not control," Emma explained to her team. "It's communication. These aren't just animals or creatures. They're complex living systems trying to understand their environment." By the end of their expedition, the human team had not only survived Core Prime, they had established the most comprehensive biological survey of the planet in galactic history. The final transmission from the planet's surface showed something unprecedented. Multiple predatory creatures surrounded the human team like protective companions. Creatures that had killed everything that had ever approached them now moved with a sense of cooperative understanding. Captain Lyra Zinn, watching from the observation ship, felt something close to wonder. Humanity had just redefined what was possible in interspecies interaction. The universe would never be the same. The Quantum Neurological Research Facility stretched across 3 interconnected molecular platforms, floating in the neutral space between star systems. Here, the most advanced scientific minds from multiple galactic civilizations had gathered to unravel the mystery of human neural capabilities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Emma's sister and a quantum neurobiologist, stood at the center of a holographic display that mapped human brain activity in unprecedented detail. Surrounding her were representatives from 27 different species, each bringing their most advanced scientific understanding. "What we're looking at," Elena explained, her voice calm and precise, "is not a skill. It's a fundamental way of perceiving existence." The holographic display showed layers of neural pathways that defied conventional biological understanding. Traditional scientific models suggested that neural networks were fixed, predictable systems. What they were seeing was something entirely different. A living, adaptive network that seemed to generate connection as a fundamental state of being. Dr. Kax, now a senior scientific advisor to the Galactic Research Consortium, zoomed in on a specific neural cluster. These mirror neurons, he explained to the assembled researchers, function differently in humans. They're not just mimicking, they're translating. The breakthrough had come from multiple expeditions, the rescue of the Horizon Research Station, the exploration of Core Prime, countless other missions where humans had demonstrated an impossible ability to communicate with life forms that defied traditional understanding. Alina pulled up a comparative display. On one side, a traditional neural map from a Zornak researcher. On the other, a human neural network. The difference was stark. Where other species saw distinct boundaries between self and other, human neural pathways showed something more fluid. Emotional states weren't just processed. They were generated, projected, transformed. It's like they're speaking a language of emotion that exists before words, one of the crystalline researchers observed. Its form was more mathematical pattern than biological entity, communication typically occurring through precise quantum exchanges. The research had uncovered multiple layers of human neural complexity. 1. Emotional frequency generation. Humans could produce neural signals that functioned almost like emotional tuning forks, capable of influencing the neural states of other living systems. 2. Adaptive empathy. Their mirror neuron systems could rapidly adapt to understand the neural states of completely alien life forms. 3. Boundary dissolution. Where other species saw clear lines between individual entities, humans seemed to perceive connection as a default state. A representative from the energy-based collectives of the Triangulum galaxy spoke. Its communication was typically a complex series of mathematical exchanges. This is not a biological advantage, the being explained. This is a fundamental difference in how they perceive existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez continued her presentation. Holographic displays showed interactions from multiple planetary systems, humans connecting with telepathic forest systems on distant planets, quantum-shifting ocean predators, energy beings that existed between matter and pure information, crystalline life forms with communication systems beyond traditional understanding. Each interaction revealed the same pattern. Where technology failed, human empathy succeeded. We're not looking at a skill, Elena emphasized. We're looking at a different way of experiencing reality. The implications were revolutionary. This wasn't just about interspecies communication. This was about understanding consciousness itself. Dr. Kax presented the final piece of evidence, a comprehensive neural map that showed how human emotional projection could literally reshape neural pathways in other living systems, not through force or technological intervention, but through a form of communication that existed before language. The assembled researchers from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence. Humanity had just provided a fundamental breakthrough in understanding consciousness, connection, and the nature of communication itself. The universe was more complex than anyone had imagined, and humans, it seemed, were holding the key to understanding its most fundamental language. The Harmony Nexus hung in space like a living testament to possibility. A massive diplomatic station designed not as a fortress of negotiation, but as a place of genuine connection. Here, species that had been in conflict for millennia would find resolution through an entirely new approach to understanding. Dr. Emma Rodriguez stood at the central platform, surrounded by representatives from species that had never before shared the same physical space without defensive protocols. To her left, a crystalline being from the Andromeda Confederation. To her right, an energy-based collective from the Triangulum galaxy. Behind her, representatives from silicon-based life forms, quantum consciousness networks, and biological systems beyond traditional comprehension. Captain Lyra Zinn watched from the observation deck, her neural interfaces tracking every moment of the unprecedented gathering. The conflicts brought to the Harmony Nexus were those deemed unsolvable by traditional diplomatic means. The thousand-year territorial dispute between the methane-based civilizations of the Outer Rim, the quantum communication breakdown between the energy collectives of Triangulum, the ecological conflict threatening multiple planetary systems in the Central Expanse. Where technological solutions had failed, human empathy was now the primary diplomatic tool. Emma moved between the delegations, not as a mediator in the traditional sense, but as a translator of fundamental understanding. Her presence seemed to generate a field of connection that cut through millennia of conflict. The crystalline representative began to communicate its grievances, a complex mathematical projection of territorial violation. Traditionally, this would have triggered immediate defensive responses from the other parties. Instead, Emma's approach allowed each side to truly perceive the emotional core of the conflict. "It's not about the territory," she explained, her voice carrying a frequency that seemed to bypass traditional communication barriers. "It's about the fear of loss, the fear of not being understood." The energy-based collective from Triangulum shifted its quantum patterns. Where previous negotiations had dissolved into complex mathematical conflicts, now there was a sense of mutual recognition. Dr. Cax, observing from a side console, marveled at the process. Humanity had transformed diplomacy from a technological exchange to an emotional connection. The conflicts that had seemed insurmountable began to dissolve, not through compromise, but through a fundamental realization of shared existence. Species that had viewed each other as threats now began to see potential for mutual understanding. Captain Lyra Zinn reflected on the journey. From first contact to this moment, humanity had consistently defied every expectation. They were not the most technologically advanced species. They were not the most militarily powerful, but they possessed something far more valuable, an ability to see beyond immediate differences. As the negotiations concluded, something unprecedented happened. The delegations didn't just sign treaties, they began to share experiences. The crystalline beings showed their complex internal structures to the energy collectives. The quantum consciousness networks began to explore ways of mutual communication that went beyond traditional technological exchanges. Emma Rodriguez stood at the center, not as a leader, but as a catalyst. The final transmission from the Harmony Nexus captured a moment that would be studied for generations. Representatives from species that had been in conflict for millennia now moved with a sense of cooperative understanding, not through force, not through technology, but through a fundamental recognition of shared existence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's scientific research had revealed the neurological basis, but here, in this moment, it was more than science. It was a fundamental reimagining of what connection could mean. The Zornak observation team watched in wonder. Humanity had done something extraordinary. They had transformed galactic diplomacy from a technological exchange to an emotional connection. As the delegations prepared to return to their respective systems, something had changed. The universe was no longer a collection of separate entities. It was a complex, interconnected system waiting to be understood. And humans, it seemed, were the key to that understanding. The final words of the conference came not from a technological declaration, but from Emma's simple observation. "We're all just trying to be understood."